So have you ever wondered what type of tools you might need for a project and how to get it for an affordable price? Well, in today's video, we're gonna be taking a look at the 5 best budget-friendly tools for woodworking in 2020, or as I like to call it, the broke college student starter kit. Roll the intro. What's up guys and gals, my name's Tanner Keith, and in today's video, we're gonna go over the essential tools that you need in your shop whenever you start woodworking. And hopefully we can kind of help you get a clear path and what you need to buy next and where to start. But let me set a scene for you. Have you ever taken the time to look at the house that you live in, and even the chair you're sitting in or the bed you're laying on right now watching this video? Well, if you think about it, there was some sort of worker that took time to build these different projects. Most all of them, I'm going to guarantee you every single one of them, most likely used a tool to be able to help get that job done. So if they use tools, most likely you're going to need the tool to do the jobs that you want to do following woodworking. Now here's the issue. When you have all these different tools in the market, it can get really difficult to figure out what to buy and what not to buy. And so my goal here is to kind of help you figure out what are things I need to begin with? What do I need now? And what are things that I really don't need to worry about? Because there's definitely a lot of things that don't matter when it comes to different tools, but we just don't really understand it. For example, what's the difference between brushless and non-brushless? And do the volts and the amps on a tool really matter? A lot of these questions are, does it matter? And so my question for you is, where are you trying to start? So here's the thing, whether you're from a sprawling city or even just a backwoods town that no one knows about, you are probably using something that someone used tools to build. And so we're gonna try to figure out, hey, what tools do you need to start with and what don't you need at all? Because I guarantee you when you're starting out on woodworking, for example, you don't need to buy a $600 planer to begin with. I mean, it's awesome, but you probably don't need it. And so most of these people that took time to build stuff use very simple tools to build their masterpieces, or flops. There's some of those out there. So tools can get really expensive, and I'm assuming you don't want to spend $1,500 on a joiner when you don't even know what a joiner does. We're going to help you figure out what are the best budget-friendly ways of getting tools, and then, hey, what are the 5 best tools that you need? So for part 1 of this video, I want to go over 4 different ways that you can get tools for an affordable price, or even no price at all. So these are going to be the 4 best ways to get tools for cheap. So number 1, just ask. It's really simple. You can either ask a relative, a friend, or even somebody that you really look up to borrow their tool and use it in a project. And sometimes they might just give it to you because a lot of this stuff is a little bit older and maybe they don't have a use for it. But if you show passion and excitement for what you're doing, they most likely would give you that tool if you're actually going to be using it. A lot of these old tools are sitting in a shop for a really long time, not being taken advantage of. So one way is just to ask. Number 2 is check Facebook Marketplace or even Craigslist. And sometimes eBay has some really good new tools for cheap. Now, this is something that you're gonna need to do a lot more research. You need to ask the people who you're buying from on Facebook or on Craigslist. I need more pictures if they don't supply enough pictures. Where are the details? How long have you had this? Does it work is a really important question when it comes to tools. Number 3 is buy it refurbished. Now, retailers have this policy to where if there's something broken, they're most likely gonna fix it. There's a lot of parts that they can reutilize. So what they're gonna do is they're gonna certify it as a refurbished piece that they've taken the time to inspect and resell, but for a fraction of the cost. And that's really important for you to know, because if you can get something for the fraction of the cost and it essentially be brand new, then that's a big deal. So you may even be able to find these for a good discounted price and have peace of mind that it wasn't dropped or thrown across the shop in a fit of rage. I threw a 2x4 one time. I got really mad, said I had to break something, almost broke my thumb. Don't throw 2x4s. And number 4, these sound kind of different, but buy it new from a retailer. You may be asking me, Tanner, how am I going to save money if I buy it new from a retailer? Well, if you take the time to look at different sales going on, this weekend is Labor Day. So right now there's a ton of sales on tools. And most likely when you buy brand new tools, as long as you're keeping care of them, they'll last forever. And who knows, maybe even your children are gonna be using them. But one of the best ways to save money is by thinking in an investment mindset. Think towards the future. If you can buy something new and it lasts you forever, you're gonna end up saving money and a lot of headache by going ahead and getting that new. So now for part 2, which is the actual part you cared about. First of all, we're gonna start with drill and driver set. You're going to need a drill, and I suggest getting something that's going to work for a long time and you're not gonna have to worry about it. And when you get a drill, I suggest getting a cordless one with a battery and even a charger with an extra battery so that you're able to continue to work. If one of the battery dies, put the other one right back onto the charger, hit that clip, take it out, and then you can keep going by putting the other charger back into the drill and not have to stop production. This is extremely helpful compared to a corded one because now you're not having to be at the leeway of the cord and the outlet you're attached to. You're going to need a drill at some point in your life, regardless if it's for woodworking or for anything else, unless you're gonna use a screwdriver the entire time. That will take you like 2 or 3 hours. It's not really economical or smart, especially since drills are so cheap nowadays. Now, drills are great for, drilling pilot holes or cavities into wood for wooden dowels or drilling screws into wood, walls, etc. And what's really cool is when it comes to drills, you can get these usually in a set for a pretty decent price. Now, when it comes to drills, there's a few different things to keep in mind when you're purchasing it. Look at the amount of power the drill outputs, because a low power drill isn't going to be really useful when you're dealing with hardwood. Remember, when you look for these different things, do your research. What do these numbers do on the front part of the drill? That's going to be good on how far you're drilling into the wood for your pilot holes. And the 1 and 2 on the front back of the drill is a 1 and a 2. So what do the 1 and 2 do? The 1 is great for drilling screws in, 2 gives a little bit more power when you're trying to drill through material. Nowadays, most of them have a keyless chuck. What that means is this part right here that connects the bit to the drill, well, if you hold this and you click the trigger on the reverse side, it releases these chuck holders. There's a specific name, I'll get back to you and I'll put it literally right here. And what those do are release this holder right here for the bit. The same way as if you were to drill into the piece of wood, you can put that chuck there, hold the drill, and those holders tighten in on the drill. So just keep that in mind. Do your research when you figure out drills, because it took me the longest time to figure out all the things that this thing was capable of. I'm kind of ashamed about it. I figured out a lot of them during this video. Now we're gonna talk about impact drivers. These have a lot more power than an ordinary drill. These tools have a much higher torque rating. This is essentially going to take the screw that you're using and drive it really far into the wood to get a really nice joint. They use these a lot in deck building circumstances, especially with deck screws. I use this tool to build outdoor furniture for my wife using just deck screws. This has a little bit that you pull out, and that releases the bit. Now, when it comes to impact drivers, you're gonna have to have a 1/4 inch hex shank bit to be able to fit into this tool. It's not really complicated. Actually, what that means is this end is specifically made for this impact driver. It's kind of like how Apple designed dongles to only fit their iPhones, and now the 3.5mm jack doesn't work for any iPhone products anymore, but it works for everything else. The drill accepts the 1/4 inch hex shank as well as any other simple bit, as the chuck jaws will grab those bits regardless of what type of shape they have at the base. Now, a drill and driver is kind of like a car engine. A car engine is extremely powerful. It's important for the car to run and it produces the power. But it's not going to get very far if you don't have the wheels to carry it. And the bits are kind of like the wheels for the drill and the driver. What this allows it to do is to be able to fit different screw types, drill different holes that you normally wouldn't be able to, and make this drill an extremely versatile tool. You can get sets like these. I have 4 of these sets that I got into a full package for 35 to 40 bucks at Lowe's. You can also get specialty bits, but here's the deal. Specialty bits are going to be more expensive, but oftentimes these are going to last you forever. They're the highest quality bits. You can get a 1/2 inch Forstner bit for about 8 or 9 bucks, and that's a lot for a single bit, but that's going to be one of the most used bits that I am going to utilize. Now, drill and drivers aren't really expensive on their own. You can get a combined set with a charger for about 200 bucks on Amazon, but currently they're at $140 on sale. Home Depot or Lowe's, you can probably get a little bit cheaper, right around $100, or even $60 to $70 for the individual drills. Now, great things with these, you could even find these for about $20 to $25 on Facebook Marketplace, and it actually be really good. Just make sure you do your research, make sure it's the amount of power that you want, the brand that you want, and that it's actually going to work for you. Now, if you're interested in drills, I'm going to have some future videos on all the tools that we go down below, explaining some more specs and some more details to help you further understand your tool and to be able to use it to its fullest capacity. So the second tool we're going to be talking about is the circular saw. Now, the circular saw is an extremely versatile tool that really replaces any miter saw or table saw. Now, of course, you eventually want to upgrade to that, but this is the way to go. It's extremely inexpensive. It makes some really accurate cuts really quickly. Now, especially if you have like a straight edge, like a 2x4, or even a square to be able to line up your cuts, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a saw that spins in a circle, but it's definitely more than that. When you're looking at a circular saw, there's a couple things to think about. You need to think about the size of your blade. Usually the common sizes come in a 5.5 inch to up to a 7.25 inch. This one is a 7.25 inch skill saw. Now, when it comes to circular saws, they're actually really cheap for what they are. This saw in particular actually only cost about $60, and it's a very, very powerful saw. You can get a lesser horsepower saw for about $40. It's also a skill saw. This tool is actually really cheap for what it is. What you really need to worry about is the type of blade that you're putting on the saw itself. And that goes with any sort of tool that cuts. Now, when it comes to the blade, what you really need to worry about is the amount of blade count that there is and what type of finish you want on your board. Now, for the work that I do, I actually prefer a higher tooth count, but when it comes to stuff like this, a lower tooth count cuts through wood faster, but it's a lot rougher. And when it comes to any sort of fine cut, you definitely want a higher tooth count, around like 80 or 100 teeth, depending on the size of your saw. Most of the sizes really boil down to do two different types: 5.5 inch size blade and then a 7.25 inch size blade. Depending on what type of circular saw you get, that's going to determine what size blade you purchase. I definitely suggest getting a circular saw right off the bat with your drill, because if you're going to do anything that has to do with wood or carpentry, you're gonna have to cut things. Put it on a track and then you've made a table saw. Be more careful and more patient, and you essentially have made this a miter saw paired with a square, and you can make some really cool angled cuts as well. Now, this tool brand new retails for about $50 to $60 US. If you're gonna get a bigger name brand like DeWalt, for example, you're gonna be paying around $120 to $140. But keep in mind, when you're purchasing tools, look at the specs, because a lot of these different tools have the exact same specs, and you're just really paying for the brand name. My suggestion is get a really good saw blade. That's going to make your life a lot easier. Okay, stop the video right there. I just had one of my lights fall, and then the glass bulb shattered everywhere, and I had to replace it with a less powerful bulb. So we're gonna pretend like this is a super dramatic lighting change just to add effect to the video. Yeah, that's what we're going with. So for number 3, we're gonna talk about the sander. And I think the sander is one of the most important tools when woodworking. And this is the first tool I ever started with, and I got it from my great-grandma, so that tells you how long this sander has been around, and it still works like a champ. Now, there's a few different types of sanders. There's the palm sander, which I have right here, an orbital sander, and even a belt sander. But the two that I want to focus on is the palm sander and the random orbital sander. Essentially is a circular type sander that spins in a random direction so that there isn't any sort of scuff marks when you're sanding across the wood. All in all, sanders are meant to kind of create a finished look. It takes a project that seems rough and kind of muddied, and it makes it look really fine and sleek. Sanders use what you would expect: sandpaper, and sandpaper comes in a ton of different grits, and it ranges anywhere from like 20 or 40 grit all the way up to 1500 grit and even more than that. But for woodworking, we're really going to focus on the 80 grit to about 320 or 400 grit. That's the sweet spot when it comes to woodworking. The lower the number grit, the coarser or rougher it is. The higher the grit number, the finer it is, or the smoother it will feel. And that's something to keep in mind when you're doing these projects. Use the coarser grit for the rougher parts, the beginning parts when you're trying to sand it and even everything out, and use the finer grit to smooth it out and give it that finished look. Now, specifically for this palm sander, when you're putting sandpaper in it, it has little clips on the side right here that you kind of unclick out. It opens up the locking mechanism, and then you slide your sandpaper in there and lock it back. Palm sanders have sheets of sandpaper that you can cut into quarters, and those quarters can be put onto the sander. You can see here I have a 320 sheet, and this pack has 5 sheets in it, and if you multiply that 4, it gives you 20 sandpaper sheets that you can use with your sander. The random orbital sander has something slightly different. They have Velcro style circular discs that you attach to the sander, and once you're done, you peel right off. Now, sanders are fairly inexpensive as well. You can get a really cheap palm sander for about $50 to $60 and a random orbital sander for not that much more, maybe $20 more than that. Now look at Lowe's and Home Depot. Usually they have some good sales on sanders, or do what I did and try to find a family member that has a really old sander that they're not going to use anymore. So now that we've discussed all the major power tools that I wanted to touch on, that brings me to another point, and that's protection when you're woodworking. Now, I highly suggest that you get some sort of ear protection, eye protection, and even some sort of bandana or mask. And you should probably have a mask by now based on what all has been going in the world recently. I highly recommend getting this stuff because I didn't use ear protection for the first year of practicing woodworking, and I can still hear ringing in my ears right now, and you don't want to ruin your ears. Also, get some eye protection. You don't want to lose an eye or have difficulty seeing in the future, and I definitely recommend getting some sort of bandana or mask, because when you're sawing or sanding a project, all this fine sawdust floats up into the air, and the last thing you want to do is to breathe that in and have lung problems when you're 60 years old. You get it. Wear some protection when you're woodworking. That's all I have to say. For number 4, we're gonna be talking about clamps. Now, clamps may not seem like an extremely valuable asset when you're working in the shop, but believe me, these are. Now, when it comes to clamps, you don't really understand how valuable you are until you're using these on every single project. If you've watched any other woodworking YouTubers out there, you've probably seen that most of them have an entire arsenal of clamps at their disposal. And I definitely recommend getting a few clamps to start out with, especially in pairs, because you're going to have scenarios where you're going to have more than just one type of clamp. There are a ton of different clamp types depending on how you want to use them. If you're gluing up something, you may want to use anywhere from a 12-inch all the way up to a 36-inch type clamp that screws together and tightens it really well. Now, if you're just trying to bind a piece of wood to a table, for example, so it doesn't move when you're working on it, you might want to use something like a squeeze clamp that's very quick to attach to the project or take off of it. A few of these include squeeze clamps, C-clamps, screw clamps, bar clamps, angle clamps, quick release clamps. You get the gist of it. One of the questions you need to ask yourself is, what am I going to be using these clamps for? If you're only making little knickknacks out of wood, you don't need something massive. But if you're making furniture like a desk, for example, you're probably going to want to get at least a 24 or 36-inch clamp to be able to bind those together if you're using wood glue, for example. If you look on YouTube or look online, you can see people actually making their own clamps out of just pipe. It's really cool and fascinating and can save you a ton of money. Clamps themselves can kind of range in price. Some are really cheap and some get really expensive, especially when you have to buy multiple of a certain type of clamp. Look on Amazon, look on Lowe's, and do some comparisons. For myself, I found out that Amazon does really well when they're packaging clamps in a set. A set of 4 is much more economical on Amazon than it is at Lowe's or Home Depot. Now, Lowe's and Home Depot have a much better selection of individual clamps. Try to figure out what suits your best needs. Something like a 3-inch squeeze clamp or even a 6-inch screw clamp. When you start to get to clamps that are about 36 inches in length, you're looking anywhere from $15 to $25 depending on how big these clamps get. But my recommendation is definitely start getting clamps now, because you're gonna really thank yourself when you need them. So the last tool I believe is essential to your process in woodworking is something you might not expect, and that's the speed square. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Tanner, is our speed square really that important to my process in woodworking? And it's not even a square, it's a triangle. And at that I'd say, do you want your builds to look stupid? A speed square is one of the most beneficial tools, especially when you're trying to make 90-degree lines and make sure everything is squared up. The last thing you want is to have any of your builds not be perpendicular or the angle that you desired it to be. It's not just great for making straight lines and extending your pencil marks. Speed squares also have the ability to cut at different angles. There's a pivot point at the corner of the square, and that allows you to, quite literally, pivot this square to get the desired angle that you want. At the hypotenuse side of this triangle, there are numbers that correlate to the particular angle that you're trying to get. This square allows you to get cuts that otherwise wouldn't be possible if you were just eyeballing it. One of my favorite uses of this square was when I was building my desk. I actually used this to make sure that my table legs and my top of my table were perpendicular to each other. Those are just the basics of a speed square. There are a ton of different numbers and really cool, interesting things about this that I can go into depth more. But I'm gonna make another video explaining the entire details of a speed square. It may seem very simple, but there's a lot to it. So these end up being actually pretty cheap for what they are. This is an aluminum Swanson speed square and it measures right at 7 inches and it only costs 10 bucks. They also have a 12-inch square if you're trying to use a square on some larger projects and you just need a little bit more of a guide. Now, they also have a larger speed square coming in at 12 inches and that is about 20 bucks, and you can find different variations of squares if you just look around. Anything regarding woodworking, a 6-inch square should do you just fine. Now let's review the major takeaways from this video. We first talked about how are we gonna get tools in an inexpensive way. We kind of discussed just borrowing it from a family member, and who knows, they might even just give it to you if they know you're excited and passionate about what you're doing. There's options like Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, and as long as you're doing your research, you should be fine. Another way is certified refurbished tools from the manufacturer that work just like the brand new tools, but for a fraction of the cost. And finally, the crazy one, maybe even buying it new is a better investment. It might just last you longer than some of the alternatives. And for the second part of the video, we discussed what type of tools do you absolutely need in your shop when you start woodworking. We talked about the drill and the driver, how those are extremely important, especially if you want to join anything together. The circular saw for cutting, the sander for finishing your projects, the clamps for, clamping, and then the speed square for making your projects actually perpendicular and not look like crap. So determine what you need right away and what can wait. You don't need the best of the best to get started, so take the time to slowly build up your tools, and before you know it, you're gonna have an entire arsenal of tools that perhaps you're gonna let someone borrow one day when they learn how to build. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. My goal is that this clarified some stuff for you and you feel more confident on what tools to buy and even where to buy them. If you felt like this video taught you something, consider leaving a like on the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. My goal is to be able to help other people understand woodworking, what they need, and how to build some really cool stuff. Leave a comment below. Did this help in any way? Do you already have some of these tools? And if you don't have any of these tools, which one are you gonna buy next and where are you gonna get it? So I hope y'all have a wonderful day and I'll see you guys in the next video.